Red wine making shares many similarities with white wine production, but also varies to a large extent due to the differences between red and white grapes. The greatest difference is due to the inclusion of grape solids, skins and seeds, and possibly stems, from the beginning of the process. And it's this contact between the juice and the grape solids during alcoholic fermentation that imparts desirable phenolic compounds and flavour components into the final wine. The goal of red wine production then is to macerate the must, which is the mixture of juice and grape solids, to extract coloured anthocyanins from the grape skins. And along with these coloured pigments, other components such as tannins from the skins and the seeds are also extracted. All these phenolic compounds are important to red wine's sensory properties, primarily mouthfeel and colour. As with white wine making, harvest timing for reds depends on the wine style being produced, disease pressure in the vineyard, and the flavour intensity of the grapes. Typically riper grapes produce red wines with more fuller body, more flavour, colour and higher alcohol content. The process begins with the grapes being destemmed and crushed. The must is pumped to a fermentation vessel to prepare for alcoholic or the primary fermentation. Depending on local regulations, permissible additions can be made at this stage. Generally, these include tartaric acid, enological tannins, and importantly, sulfur dioxide. Other additions include sugar, tannin, enzymes, and yeast nutrients. To initiate alcoholic fermentation, the inoculation of a selected yeast can be undertaken. Otherwise, wild yeast present on the grapes and winemaking equipment conduct the fermentation. The next part of the process largely relates to extracting colour from the grape skins, and different techniques are used to achieve this. Some juice may be run off prior to yeast inoculation to increase the ratio of skins to juice in the remaining must before colour extraction has begun, and this is termed bleeding off. Another option that is relatively common is a pre-fermentative cold soak, involving holding the must below 10 to 15 degrees centigrade for several days. Must heating or thermovinification can be used instead of cold soaking to facilitate extraction of the phenolic compounds, in particular the anthocyanins. This involves rapidly heating a must to 60 to 70 degrees centigrade and then cooling and pressing the juice prior to inoculation. In the days after fermentation begins, the skins rise to the top of the fermenter and form a thick cap. Conventional practices are aimed at managing the cap, which allows extracting the phenolics and other matter from the cap. Cap management can involve periodic operations such as pushing down the floating skins, and this is also termed plunging or pigeage. Pumping the fermenting juice over the cap or decanting and returning the fermenting juice over the cap can also be used. Keeping the cap submerged under the surface of the fermenting juice using what is termed heading down boards is also common. The design of the fermentation vessel can be critical to the winemaker's strategy for cap management. Incorporation of air during this operation not only is of benefit to yeast performance, but is also crucial to the development of stable wine pigments. Mixing also helps cool the cap, as considerable heat differences can exist between the cap and the fermenting juice. And the temperature of the fermentation ranges from 18 to 30 degrees centigrade. Temperature is the winemaker's main tool for managing fermentation rate. Fermentation vessels are typically temperature controlled, and this assists in managing fermentation rate. When the winemaker is satisfied with the alcoholic content, residual sugar, colour, flavour and mouthfeel properties of the wine, the ferment is drained and pressed. There may be a period of post-fermentation extended maceration on grape solids for several days or even weeks at ambient temperature prior to pressing, and this enables further phenolic extraction. Free-run and pressed wine fractions are fermented to dryness, usually in separate tanks to enable blends to be made later. The wine is then racked or decanted and further clarified if necessary and inoculated for malolactic fermentation. Malolactic fermentation is used to deacidify and improve wine sensory characters. It reduces greenness and it softens the mouthfeel. MLF can also occur due to the presence of indigenous lactic acid bacteria and can currently occur with alcoholic fermentation. Red wines undergo an important part of the aging process in tanks or oak barrels after fermentation. This maturation allows the wine to stabilise and clarify, as well as imparting beneficial oak flavours when barrels are used. and it leads to reactions which impact wine colour and mouthfeel. That is, reactions which occur to make the colour long-lived and the mouthfeel softer. We'll discuss this more next week. Additions of sulphur dioxide and tartaric acid can occur at this time, along with fining to moderate the phenolic profile, mostly related to mouthfeel astringency. The wines are usually racked or decanted periodically to remove the wine from any sediment and then returning it to the storage vessel. After a period of maturation, the wine is decanted and blended to produce the final wine, further stabilised if necessary, clarified, analysed and adjusted, and then stored in readiness for final filtration and bottling. As with white wine, the use of inert gases, keeping the wines cool and ensuring the vessels are topped up to eliminate air spaces are important considerations at any time the wine is being transferred and stored. Let's briefly discuss another important red wine style, rosé. Rosé winemaking is more or less a mixture between red grape processing and white wine making, but it's typically not simply a blend of red and white wines, except for some sparkling rosé wines. Red grapes provide rosé wine colour ranging from very pale pink, orange to deep pink red, which can be modified based on the extent of skin contact. The must is typically pressed prior to or early in the fermentation, and then continues in the same manner as for white wine making, with very similar considerations. Alternatively, rosés can be produced from the juice runoff or bleed off from the must that is macerating in preparation for red wine making, and the pink juice can be fermented separately from the remaining red wine must. The goal of each approach is to produce a crisp, fruit-driven wine containing some red colour but without the associated phenolic compounds that affect mouthfeel that accompany normal red wine making. Aging is uncommon as these wines are made to be consumed soon after release while they are fresh, fruity and the colour is vibrant.